All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. I'm Thomas. I do videos on many different subjects. We are looking at the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. He wrote many books back in the 20th century on his theory of everything, which can be summarized that the universe is not made out of matter, it's not made out of energy, but it is made out of motion, or he would also say change in 3 dimensions. Motion, a scalar motion, motion with no particular direction, or all particular directions. You can think of it as taking a balloon, putting a bunch of dots on the balloon, and then blowing up the balloon. All of the dots are moving away from each other, but they're not moving in any particular direction or all directions, or just inhaling and then sucking the balloon back, and then all the dots are moving toward each other. So he took that basic idea, universe is made out of motion. Motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are reciprocals of each other, meaning that they have the same general qualities, but they have a reciprocal nature. So you can invert them to get kind of the opposite. And they both have 3 dimensions, or 4, I would say. And they also have, they are progressing. So time is always getting later and later. Space is always getting further and further and further apart. And they both are quantized, meaning they have a minimum unit. 1 unit of space and 1 unit of time is the speed of light. And the speed of light is the boundary between the what he calls the material sector, the sector that we're more familiar with, of chemistry and atoms and molecules, and the cosmic sector, which is the beyond light speed sector. But when you have a material body, a chemical aggregate, and it aggregates to a complicated enough level or complex enough level, then it can be eligible to be accommodated or joined by a cosmic unit. And this joining between a material and cosmic unit is what he calls life unit. And the life unit then can become more and more complicated until it reaches its most complicated level, which is, Larson calls that the intelligent human. And that then can be taken over under the control of a sector 3 unit, the material being sector 1, the cosmic being sector 2. Sector 3 is really a unit that is actually independent of space and time. And I would argue that that is light itself, and that that is governed by ethical principles or good principles. And so the intelligent human there has 2 different controls. One is governed by survival, and the other one is governed by ethics. And so that is kind of where we are as humans. And this is the topic of his final book that came out in 1995, 5 years after he died. And it is called Beyond Space and Time. And it's, all of the rest of his books are on the harder sciences, including economics, but mostly physics and chemistry and astronomy. But this one delves into philosophy and religion, a little bit of biology, and some psychology. And we are looking at chapter 13. This is, I think, about the 31st video that I've done on this book, Beyond Space and Time. And we're in the middle of chapter 13, which is called Emotions. And last time we were just talking about the fear and anger being like the primary emotions, they're being opposite to each other. And then he was kind of comparing them with joy and pleasure. And so that's where we are right here, discussing the distinctions between fear and anger, and then joy and pleasure. Okay. Looking at the situation from another direction, fear and anger, like intelligence, for which they are very limited substitutes, are tools for attaining human or animal objectives. Joy and sadness are reactions of the organism to the achievement or failure to achieve those objectives. In reality, they are merely relatively intense forms of pleasure and pain, respectively. For present purposes, we will call these results of actions that have taken place or are taking place sensations, to distinguish them from emotions, the reactions to stimuli that determine the actions that the individual will take if not overruled by reason. Okay, so before this, he had identified emotions as being a more general and inferior form of reason. That reason comes to more specific conclusions, but they are basically competing against each other, reason and emotion. But reason will always win, but emotion was established much earlier in the so-called evolutionary scale. And so emotions had a huge head start over reason, but reason is narrowing the gap. But for things like joy and sadness, he's calling those sensations as opposed to emotions. Now, we had just gotten done with 4 chapters that were talking about communications from Sector 3, this ethical, independent, general region. And those are variously called ESP, intuition, scientific insight, and religious revelation. And so those are Sector 3, coming from this good ethical region. Emotions are really a Sector 2 thing that have more to do with, and so is reason, that have more to do with survival. But he says that the intelligence is the prerequisite for the Sector 3 communication. Okay, so now he goes on, inasmuch as this present work is a scientific investigation of the metaphysical region and the effect of influences from that region on human life, we are concerned with emotions and sensations only insofar as they have some bearing on the relations between man and Sector 3. Fear and anger come within our field of study because they, like intelligence, are tools that can be applied to the furtherance or hindrance of objectives that are in harmony with the principles of Sector 3. Sensations such as joy and sorrow, on the other hand, have no Sector 3 significance. If an individual experiences anything that could be called a sensation just because he does the morally right thing in a given set of circumstances, it is not joy. Joy results from the successful accomplishment of some Sector 2 objective, biological, social, economic, etc. Similarly, sadness, sorrow, or grief, the sensations that are aroused by failure to reach Sector 2 objectives or loss of some source of enjoyment, are not relevant to the matters now under consideration. As the word is commonly used, emotion refers to a consciously felt state, says Hall. Most of these physiological states included under this definition are neither pure emotions, comparable to fear, nor pure sensations, comparable to joy, but combinations of the two, together with various elements of what the psychologists call drives. For example, Finality, or a close approximation thereto, is a prerequisite for evoking objective related states such as joy. The prize must be won or the battle lost. The outcome is still uncertain. The physiological state will be more complex. Perhaps it will be anxiety, a rather vague form of fear mixed with various sensations. From the standpoint of the present investigation, the physiological results of taking actions that have moral significance are of particular interest. As already noted, doing the morally right thing does not evoke joy in the ordinary sense of that term. It may foster some kind of a feeling of being in harmony with the better aspects of human life, and this could be considered a sensation. The results of taking an action that is morally wrong depend upon two factors. One, the ultimate outcome of the action, and two, whether or not the individual remains convinced that he made a sound decision. That decision was reached because of his belief that it would produce a net total of desirable results. Unless there was some kind of miscalculation, the action should have produced some kind of satisfaction, perhaps even enough to arouse joy. The successful criminal may be quite elated over his accomplishment. In actual practice, miscalculation is very common, and the person who finds himself in prison or otherwise penalized for his action is likely to be subject to regret. For our purposes, regret will have to be classed with sensations such as joy and sorrow, since it has no Sector 3 implications. But if the individual now realizes, either because a reconsideration of the situation has been forced upon him by the troubles in which he is now enmeshed, or for some other reason that his decision with respect to taking the action was contrary to his own moral standards, he may experience remorse, which is a strong, often overpowering emotion that calls for expiatory action. A prerequisite for remorse is a feeling of guilt, but the existence of the guilt sensation is not necessarily accompanied by remorse. All that is necessary to arouse the guilt sensation is a recognition that the act is morally wrong. Such a recognition usually exists at the time of the original decision to take the action, and it is one of the factors that entered into that decision. Since the decision was taken in spite of whatever feeling of guilt may have existed, the emotion of remorse follows only if there is a reconsideration of that decision, and if, at the time of the reconsideration, the desire to conform to the moral code is strong enough to outweigh whatever moral benefit, whatever non-moral benefits may have accrued from the action. The conflicts between some of the conclusions reached in the preceding pages and opinions expressed in current psychological and philosophical literature are due primarily to the fact that we are using the term emotion in a limited sense. So most philosophers are using emotions to also cover sensations. And Larson is trying to restrict that meaning. Because he says that the sensations have no Sector 3 implications, whereas the emotions do. These emotions are in active competition with intelligence, and the extent to which any individual is able to overrule them is a criterion or prerequisite of the stage that he has reached in his advance along the evolutionary road leading upward from his animal background. This criterion will be even more significant in application to the next class of emotions that we will consider. All of the emotions and sensations thus far considered may be classified as personal. That is, they are related to the individual's own situation. He fears that which may cause harm to him or his possessions. He experiences joy when something directly or indirectly favorable to him occurs. He knows anxiety when his interests are in jeopardy, and so on. But in addition, there are what we may call social emotions, similar states that are related to the situations of others. Inasmuch as an emotion of this kind involves three elements: the individual's own feelings, his perception of the situations of other persons involved, and the relations between him and the others. It is a complex phenomenon. Love, for example, is practically undefinable. For present purposes, the exact nature of these social emotions is immaterial. They are subject to essentially the same considerations as emotions. They constitute a biological mechanism whereby an individual's reaction to a situation involving interpersonal relationships is determined in the same manner as his reaction to a situation that arouses fear or anger. That is, each emotion evokes a standard response. Unlike the personal emotion, they produce little or no observable physiological effects. And for that reason, the psychologists are not inclined to classify them with the personal emotions. And he cites a number of psychologists or philosophers here. Taking an action taken out of sympathy for an afflicted person without any rational consideration of the question as to whether the action was justified is ordinarily called an emotional reaction to the situation. Although here again, no physiological evidence of the emotion is usually visible. Emotions of this character are social emotions. The psychological changes accompanying a primary personal emotion are bodily preparations for the actions that result from the emotion. Fear, for example, initiates preparations for a quick flight. Now, ordinarily, the actions that result from the social emotions, if not prevented by the reasoning process, are not of an urgent nature, nor are they of great personal concern. So no special physiological preparation is required. There is another significant difference between personal and social emotions. Unless some abnormality exists, personal emotions are always intended to serve the interest of the individual. Social emotions are of two kinds. As in the kind of situation just mentioned, they may involve sympathy with the person or persons concerned, and they will generate. The actions they generate will be favorable to those persons, but instead, they may involve some degree of antipathy, in which case the actions will be unfavorable to those that are affected. Unlike the purely personal emotions, which never rank higher than ethically neutral, the social emotions may have positive ethical value. Depending on the circumstances. Here again, the more advanced type of mechanism, reason, that is available to human beings for making personal decisions is also available as an alternate to the social emotions. In the area of personal behavior, where the true nature of the conflicts between reason and emotion is clearly visible, the superiority of reason is not seriously challenged. In the absence of any difference in kind between the decisions to be made in the social areas and those that are made in the personal areas, it necessarily follows that reason is superior in the social areas as well. But this point is not generally conceded. Many decisions are made routinely on the basis of emotional reactions rather than the result of reasoned conclusions. Where a strictly personal decision is to be made, an individual tends to look at all angles of the problem, even though emotion may call for immediate and drastic reaction or action. Anyone in full possession of his faculties will at least listen to what his reason tells him before he makes his move. On the other hand, if an emotion of sympathy for some person or group calls for some supportive action, the questions that can be answered by reason are not of enough personal concern to generate the kind of careful consideration that would be required in order to arrive at a rational evaluation of the situation. All right, so these social issues, which get so little rational consideration, are actually much more complex than the personal problems that are so carefully evaluated. An act of compassion based on an emotion of sympathy for a criminal may not only be detrimental to that individual in the long run, but may result in serious consequences to other persons whose interests were given no consideration when the decision was made. A law based on an emotion of sympathy for low-paid workers and intended to give them higher pay or better working conditions may, in fact, deny them employment. A measure aimed at a corporation against which there is an emotional prejudice may actually accomplish nothing but raise prices for that corporation's customers, and so on indefinitely. For that, you would probably need to look at Larson's works on economics. But we're almost done with this chapter. We'll be finishing this tomorrow. But that's all for today. So have a great day and hope to see you back tomorrow to discuss emotions. And then the next chapter is on thinking and memory. Have a good day.